Before the headlines, before the scandals, there was only Daniel Reeves, the man everyone wanted to be. Born in the quiet suburbs of Manchester, Daniel had the kind of charm that couldn't be taught. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they already knew him. Casting directors called him natural. Fans called him perfect. And for a while, the world agreed. His rise was fast. From stage plays in small theaters to starring roles on national television, Daniel's face became familiar in every home. He wasn't just an actor. He was a symbol of class, of success, of the dream that every struggling artist chased. When he smiled, brands sold out. When he spoke, audiences listened. On screen, he was the hero who always found redemption. Off screen, he tried to play the same role, but behind that flawless image, there were cracks only a few could see. Co-stars whispered about sudden outbursts. Directors spoke carefully about his difficult temperament. Assistants came and went, some out of exhaustion, others out of fear. Daniel had a temper that could light up a room one moment and burn it down the next. Yet fame has a strange power. It hides the truth as easily as it creates it. And for years, it protected him. By 2022, Daniel Reeves was untouchable. He owned a luxury flat overlooking the Thames, had a £1 million contract for a new film, and a social media following that worshipped every post he made. Interviews painted him as private but passionate. No one questioned what that really meant. Then came the night that would change everything. It was late November, rain washing over the London streets. Outside a private club in Soho, voices echoed. Sharp, angry, desperate. Witnesses said Daniel was arguing with a woman, a young journalist who had been covering his latest movie. Seconds later, there was a shout, a thud, and the sound of a car door slamming. By the time anyone reacted, Daniel's black BMW was gone. The woman was left behind, shaken, bruised, and silent. The next morning, her story broke. It wasn't just gossip. It was a police report. Actor Daniel Reeves under investigation for assault, the headline screamed. Within hours, his name trended across the internet. Talk shows debated what had really happened. His fans defended him. His sponsors disappeared. When Daniel finally stepped outside his apartment, cameras surrounded him like wolves. His expression, calm, cold, practiced, betrayed nothing. "It's a misunderstanding," he said. But the world wasn't listening anymore. For years, Daniel had lived in the spotlight. Now, that same light was burning through the mask. Behind every smile, there was anger. Behind every success, a secret. And that night in Soho wasn't just an accident. It was the first glimpse of who he truly was. As his PR team scrambled to contain the damage, Daniel stared at the flashing cameras with the same look that once made millions love him. But this time, there was no movie, no script, no second take. His story, the one written in gold, had just collided with the one written in blood. For weeks after the Soho incident, Daniel Reeves lived in silence, or at least tried to. But silence doesn't last long when the world smells blood. Every news outlet wanted a piece of him. Some called him a monster. Others called him misunderstood. But no one, not even Daniel himself, seemed sure which version was true anymore. The first video surfaced 3 days later. Blurry, shaky footage from a security camera outside the club. It showed only a few seconds. Daniel shouting, the woman stepping back, and a sudden movement before the screen cut off. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Enough to make people believe what they already wanted to believe. Online, hashtags exploded. ARG, cancel Daniel Reeves. Justice for Emily. Every social media platform turned into a courtroom. Strangers became judges, juries, and executioners. And for the first time in his career, Daniel couldn't act his way out of the script. The studio behind his upcoming film suspended the project indefinitely. His agent stopped answering calls. Friends from the industry, the ones who used to fill his phone with invitations, quietly disappeared. Fame had built him a castle, but now that same fame was eating it brick by brick. He tried to fight back. His legal team released a statement. Polished, rehearsed, and cold. Mr. Reeves denies all allegations and will fully cooperate with authorities. But words on paper can't compete with faces on screens. Every time the footage played on the news, every time a new exclusive source appeared on talk shows, the gap between the Daniel people knew and the one they saw widened. In private, Daniel was falling apart. He stopped sleeping. The curtains in his penthouse stayed closed. Bottles piled up faster than the messages on his phone. Some nights, he would scroll endlessly through headlines, reading every insult, every lie, every truth he couldn't control. The man who once thrived under lights now couldn't stand his own reflection. Reporters camped outside his building. One morning, as Daniel stepped out to get into his car, a young journalist shouted, "Do you have anything to say to your fans?" He turned, his eyes dark and exhausted. "I didn't do what they're saying," he whispered. The clip went viral, not because of his words, but because of his face. Gone was the confident actor. In his place stood a man stripped bare, vulnerable, angry, afraid. But the story didn't end there. A new headline broke the following week. Exclusive second woman comes forward. This time, the accusation was older, from years ago during the filming of his first major TV series. She claimed Daniel had a history of intimidation, of using his fame as a shield. Suddenly, the first case didn't look like an accident. It looked like a pattern. Public opinion shifted overnight. Streaming platforms quietly removed his shows. Billboards were replaced. His image, once the definition of charm, was now a warning. Even those who wanted to defend him couldn't find the words anymore. And Daniel, he vanished. His phone was disconnected. His social accounts went dark. For the first time in 15 years, Daniel Reeves, the man who couldn't stay off camera, disappeared completely. But in truth, he wasn't gone. He was preparing for the one performance that could decide the rest of his life. Because the next time he'd step into a spotlight, it wouldn't be on a film set. By the time Daniel Reeves walked into court, the man who once ruled the red carpet was unrecognizable. His suit hung loose on him, his eyes hollow, his hair streaked with gray that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. The cameras outside flashed like lightning, each one catching a different version of his fall. Some saw guilt, others saw fear. Only Daniel knew it was both. The trial became national theater. For weeks, the courtroom was packed. Reporters in the back rows, sketch artists at the front, and a line of fans outside hoping to glimpse the man they once adored. Every morning, Daniel took the same slow walk past them, surrounded by police and lawyers, the sound of camera shutters echoing like applause turned cruel. The prosecution's case was sharp and methodical. They played the video again, the same blurred clip, but now dissected frame by frame. They read text messages Daniel had sent to the journalist, short, cold, threatening in tone. And when the victim herself took the stand, her voice didn't shake. She told the court everything. The argument, the push, the fear. Daniel sat motionless, staring straight ahead. His hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When his lawyer whispered for him to look sympathetic, he didn't move. Sympathy was a language he no longer understood. Then came the defense. They painted Daniel as a man pushed to the edge, hounded by fame, trapped in a system that built him up only to break him. "He is not a monster," his attorney said. "He is a man who lost control for a moment. Nothing more." But in the age of social media, moments last forever. And public forgiveness is a currency long spent. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs, "Believe her." No more excuses. Others chanted his name, desperate to believe their idol was innocent. It wasn't a trial anymore. It was a war of faith. Then something unexpected happened. On the third week, a former co-star appeared as a witness. Uninvited, unexpected. She told her story quietly. He once grabbed me during a rehearsal and called it method acting. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His lawyer asked the judge to dismiss the statement as irrelevant. The judge refused. That single testimony shattered what little defense remained. Now, the story wasn't about one night in Soho. It was about a pattern. A man who thought he was untouchable. The headlines the next morning said it all. The fall of a golden boy. By the end of the trial, Daniel's silence became his curse. The jury saw arrogance, not dignity. When the verdict came, the world watched live. Guilty! The word echoed through the courtroom like a death sentence. Daniel didn't flinch. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering something about appeals, but he didn't hear it. All he could think about was how quiet it had become. No camera flashes. No applause. Just silence. The judge spoke next. Mr. Reeves, you spent years building a life based on image and illusion. Today that illusion ends. You will serve 4 years in prison. And just like that, the lights that had followed him for 15 years went out. When they led him away, Daniel turned once toward the crowd. Among the reporters and strangers, he saw a single face he recognized. The journalist from Soho. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. As the doors closed behind him, Daniel finally exhaled. Not in relief, not in regret, but in acceptance. For the fate would be in a courtroom. Prison doesn't care who you were outside. It doesn't care about magazine covers, red carpets, or million-pound contracts. Inside, every man wears the same uniform, eats the same food, and stares at the same walls. And for Daniel Reeves, that was the hardest lesson of all. On his first night, the guards treated him like any other inmate. No special treatment, no sympathy. The cell was small. A steel bed, a flickering bulb, and a concrete floor that smelled of bleach and regret. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound that ended whatever pride he had left. He sat on the bed, staring at the wall, replaying every mistake that had brought him there. The anger, the arrogance, the silence. For years, he had lived in a world where people laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. Now, no one cared if he spoke at all. Weeks passed, then months. Fame fades fast behind bars. At first, whispers followed him through the hallways. That's the actor, right? Some called him Hollywood. Others mocked him. But soon even that died down. He was just another prisoner, a number in the system, forgotten by the outside world. Daniel tried to adjust. He cleaned floors, stacked kitchen trays, and read whatever books the library offered. But the noise in his head never stopped. Every night, he'd lie awake hearing echoes of applause mixed with the judge's voice saying, "Guilty." It wasn't the cell that trapped him. It was his memory. Then came a letter. It was from his mother. Handwritten, careful, and full of questions he couldn't answer. "I raised you to be kind, Daniel. What happened to you?" she wrote. That single line cut deeper than any sentence. He stared at the page for hours, unable to write back. Inside, he kept to himself. Some inmates tried to befriend him, others tried to provoke him, wanting to see if the famous man would break. He didn't, not once. But each day, a small piece of the old Daniel disappeared. The pride, the ego, the showman, all gone, stripped away by routine and silence. One day, while cleaning the corridor, he overheard 2 guards talking. "Hard to believe," one said. "Used to be on TV, now look at him." The other laughed. They all think they're special until the door closes. That sentence stayed with him. In the months that followed, Daniel started volunteering in the prison library. Not for redemption, but for escape. He began reading about history, philosophy, even religion, anything that helped him make sense of what he had become. He found a strange peace in it. For the first time in years, no one wanted anything from him. No scripts, no lies. Just silence and time, but redemption is never quiet for long. One morning, a new inmate recognized him, a young man who had grown up watching Daniel's old shows. "You were my hero," he said softly through the bars. "I used to think you had everything." Daniel didn't reply. He just smiled faintly and said, "That's the problem. I thought so too." By his third year, Daniel had changed. His reflection no longer showed the celebrity people once adored, just a man who finally saw himself without the mask. He started writing, notes, thoughts, memories. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was survival. He titled his notebook, "The Prison Behind the Spotlight." And in those pages, he wrote the truth that fame had hidden. You don't fall because the world hates you. You fall because you believe it never will. 4 years later, the gates opened. No music, no crowd, no welcome. Just a cold wind and a free man walking out into a world that had already forgotten him. Daniel Reeves stepped into daylight, thinner, quieter, and stripped of everything he once thought made him who he was. The reporters were gone. The fans were gone. Even the hate had moved on. He walked down the street with a small paper bag, a few clothes, an old book, and a letter from his mother he'd read so many times it had started to fade. Freedom didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like debt, something he had to repay by living differently. He found a small apartment on the outskirts of London where no one recognized him. The walls were blank, the rent was cheap, and the silence was endless. But for the first time, he didn't run from it. He lived inside it. Each morning, he took long walks through the fog, watching people rush to work, laughing, living, unaware of who walked past them. For the first time, anonymity felt like mercy. Months passed before he touched a camera again. Not to act, but to tell a story. His story. He began filming short monologues on an old phone. No lights, no makeup, no script. Just his voice, raw and steady, speaking about mistakes, guilt, and the price of pride. At first, no one watched. But slowly, views began to climb. People didn't see a celebrity anymore. They saw a warning. One video titled "The Man I Pretended to Be" went viral. In it, Daniel said only one line that caught fire online. "I built a life everyone wanted, except me." That clip spread across platforms, not because it was polished, but because it was true. The same media that once destroyed him now called it a redemption arc. But Daniel didn't care about headlines anymore. He wasn't looking for forgiveness, just understanding. He started teaching acting at a community center under a different name. His students didn't know his past, and he didn't tell them. He taught them not about fame or fortune, but about honesty. "Don't perform life," he would say. "Live it." Sometimes he'd watch them rehearse and catch a glimpse of his younger self, hungry, naive, full of light. It hurt, but it also healed. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the London skyline, Daniel sat by his window, staring out at the quiet city below. For years, he'd feared silence. Now it was all he had, and all he needed. He reached for his old notebook. "The Prison Behind the Spotlight." On the last page, he wrote, "Fame doesn't destroy people. It only shows who they already were." He closed the notebook, placed it beside his bed, and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who finally understands the cost of everything he once desired. The next morning, he left his apartment early and walked toward the Thames. The city was waking up, lights flickering, trains humming, footsteps echoing on wet pavement. Daniel stopped on the bridge, hands resting on the cold rail, watching the water move beneath him. He whispered softly, "For the first time, I don't need an audience." And as the wind swept past him, carrying the sounds of the city, he walked away, quietly, deliberately, disappearing into the crowd.